Thank you for joining us on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. And here's your host, Chris Cebollero.
Once again, it's time for the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. I got to tell you, man, we have a real special show today. You know, one of the things that you hear a lot is people make excuses about success. And people make excuses about their achievements. And people say, well, you know, I wasn't given the best opportunity in my life. And if my life was maybe different, maybe things would have been different for me in the end. And I got to tell you, our next guest is really going to kind of shoot some holes in the fact that there could be adversity in your life, and then you can wind up being very successful on the back end of that. And, you know, this story is something that I really kind of struggled with bringing you. I mean, we discuss leadership topics, and we discuss things that help us grow and that help us develop. And there was a friend of mine, and she's been on the show, Tammy Kling, who is really great at being an advocate for people, and she is the coach of coaches, and she kind of introduced me to our next guest. And I want to give you a little bit of background as to how he came here, and then I'm going to introduce him, and then we're going to kind of talk about how he developed and got out of that tragedy that happened in his past. There was an episode of ESPN 60 which portrayed his life, and we're going to kind of put that into the show notes as well so you guys can check that out. But think about this. You're a 10-year-old, normal 10-year-old growing up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and you're active. You're playing baseball and you're playing football, and you know there's a great picture in the video of our guest. He's wearing football uniform, and he's missing his front teeth, but he's out there and he's doing it. And then one of the things that him and his brother got into was martial arts. And you know, as a young kid, when you're growing up and you think about the Bruce Lee and you think about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles at the time, they were big back when my son was growing up. You want to get into martial arts. Well, what happened is that teacher who became part of the family, who became part of the fabric of this close family, wound up doing the unthinkable and started to sexually abuse one of the boys, and in fact actually kidnapped him for a while. It was about 9 days or so that they disappeared. As they found our guest, they brought him back home, and then all this now started to come out. All this sexual abuse and all this manipulation came out. And this really was devastating to the family. I mean, you got to think about this. You as a father who you coach your kids and who you want to have the best life, you now realize that in your thought, you didn't protect your son as best as you could to find out that he was sexually abused over a long period of time. Well, as they brought this man back to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, someone was waiting for him in the airport. And as he passed a bank of telephones, Jody's dad was there waiting and put one bullet into this guy's head and killed him instantly. And if we think about this now as a tragedy, as we think about the horror of this event, this would have put any family into a tailspin. But how do you pull out of that? Well, let's go ahead and ask those questions. And our guest is Jody Plauche. And Jody, come on in here. I got to tell you, I hope I did this story a little bit of justice. But as I prepared for this show and as I watched the ESPN E60, it was horrible. And I just want to thank you for being here to discuss it with us.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
You know, so as I kind of talked about this event, I mean, did I cover the high points of it? I mean, did I leave anything out? I mean, maybe you could just kind of give us a little bit of your own background as to how this came about.
I think you did a good job. One of the things that caught my notice is that you mentioned Bruce Lee and the Ninja Turtles. One of the first, or actually the first time we actually spent extracurricular time outside of the karate class with the karate teacher was to go see the movie called They Call Me Bruce. And it was a kind of like a spoof on, They Call Me Bruce, and it was a karate movie making fun of, like, not Bruce Lee, but just making fun of this particular guy. And after that, we went to Chuck E. Cheese, where my family was having like a birthday for my cousin. And so that's when this particular individual kind of started to, gain the trust of my family. And ultimately, that's what he did. And that's what anybody that sexually abuses a child has to do, is they have to gain the trust of the family in order to be able to be close to the child so that they can spend time alone with that child. Because if they don't have time to spend alone with the child, they don't have time to abuse them.
Let's kind of talk about this concept now, and maybe we take it from the beginning, but I really want to kind of move to the fact of how you've grown under this, under this stigma of this sexual abuse and with your family, and how you've grown into the success that you are today. But I guess my first question is to you, as this evolved, as this happened with your dad in the airport, and now he's under arrest, how did that affect you? How did that affect your family now as you were trying to move forward?
All right, well, we have to go back to when I was 11 years old, because I was 11 years old when the shooting and the kidnapping occurred, okay? At the time, and this isn't just me, this is other compliant victims is the term for it. Usually children that are being sexually abused, they don't hate their abuser. They don't like the action, or they're too young to know that it's wrong. So I did not hate Jeff at the time. And so at the time in 1984, I was upset that my father killed him. I was more upset over Jeff's death than I was over, the possibility of my dad going to jail for the rest of his life.
Wow, that's interesting.
So that was my initial response. But then, obviously, over time, you come to realize that, okay, Jeff wasn't this good guy that just had this problem. He was this predator.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things. I think you say that very well. At the time when you're 10 years old, you don't know that this is, is this necessarily bad? Is what's happening to me, do I know that this is wrong? And then, but it was interesting how you said that you were more upset with your dad over the shooting. So what was the catalyst then, Jody, for you to finally say, my dad was being the ultimate protector. He was kind of taking care of me in the end, to kind of move you from being mad at him to understanding what he did.
Well, first off, I would never advise any parent to respond like my dad did. Okay, my dad actually is the opposite of how a parent should respond. A parent should not put themselves in a position to be prosecuted and put in jail for the rest of his life. A parent should be there for their child. That said, one of the things that I think actually helped in my recovery was the fact that it wasn't something that I kept a secret for 20 years. Because when the shooting occurred, then in 1984, they didn't do that "we don't name the victim." And they were out there, for sexually abusing Jody Plauche's son. I would be on the bus in 7th grade driving down the road, and we had a radio, and the news would come on, and they'd be like, "In the news today, Gary Plauche, and for the sex," and it sounded like they were screaming, "the sexual abuse of his son, Jody." And, for whatever reason, middle school kids can be brutal, but my set of friends they kind of, I guess their parents must have sat them down and talked to them, but they were very understanding. The public nature of it, I think, kind of made me have to deal with it at a young age.
When you think about that, you're absolutely right that the mid-'80s were a little bit different than they are today, but it's good that you at least had some of your friends that were supportive. And as you now start to develop and try to get past this, Jody, I'm sure that there were a lot of feelings that you had inside you that may have questioned, am I a good kid? Or may have questioned, did I cause all this to happen? So how did you deal with all that? And how did you, especially at that young age, how do you come out from that and say, I'm going to have a productive life?
For the answer to this question, I have to give credit to my mother. Okay, one of the things my mother used to do when we were little, she would sit down with us and we would watch those after-school specials, or if there was some, made-for-TV movie that had a challenging topic, she would sit us down. And before I ever encountered this karate instructor, my mother made me and my brother watch this made-for-TV movie called A Fallen Angel, and it was about predators who prey on children. I think it was about child pornography. She made us watch this before I ever encountered a karate teacher, and she told us that there are people out there that want to do bad things to children. And so when my karate teacher started testing my boundaries, that's when you go through the phase of the sexual abuse, they have to test the boundaries to see how the child reacts to the initial inappropriate touch. Well, I was driving the car, and the karate teacher put his hands in my lap and started touching me, and I was like, whoa. And so when it continued, that's when in my head I was like, oh, this is one of those people my mother told me about. So I never, ever blamed myself. I never thought that I did anything wrong. And I think that's because my mother had kind of prepared me as a young child, and I wasn't just like this blank slate. I had a little knowledge that made that big of a difference because I never blame myself. Not once. I always knew he's the one that's doing something wrong. I'm not.
That's awesome. And I mean, it's really great and I remember those after school specials. And particularly, I remember this made for TV movie that you're talking about, because that was my era as well. And, we were able, these after school specials really kind of did their job to teach us about, drug use and predators and all these things. So, I mean, kudos to your mom for kind of helping you set that up. So as you now start to grow and as you now start to develop and maybe get into your teen years, Did you hold this? Was this kind of weighing on you to say, how do I break free of this? I mean, people are looking at you. People are pointing their fingers at you. People are maybe saying things behind your back. I mean, how do you get out from this? And how do you, kind of move into your late teens and into your adulthood and kind of bring this forward?
That's a good question. It's kind of weird. I mean, if you look at my life, you can say, okay, before karate and after karate. And I compare it to like a grieving process. It didn't happen overnight. Like I didn't just all of a sudden go, okay, I'm better. But it was something that, we had the court, it drug out, and eventually my dad pled no contest to manslaughter. And luckily for him, he was sentenced to 5 years probation and 300 hours of community service. So he didn't have to do any jail time. And that let us kind of reestablish our family again. And I almost like a jigsaw puzzle piece. Like if you could take from 10 to 12 out, and then you just reinsert back, and we literally went right back to a normal family. And it might be because of my parents' personality. It might be because of we never, I don't want to say took it serious, because it was a serious thing, but we always were able to talk about it. Nothing really inappropriate. We were always kind of never heavy on the subject. Like they didn't tell me, "Oh, you're scarred for life. You're forever damaged." They were just like, my mother was like, when I finally disclosed to my mother, she was like, "Okay, go play." And I was like, "Okay." And I got on my bike and I went and rode and I went and played with the kids. I had been dealing with that for a year before anyone found out. So I was like, my grades in school were 6 A's and a B, so my schoolwork was fine, and I was just like, it almost made me feel better because I knew it wasn't going to happen to me anymore.
I got to tell you, I mean, that right there, just the feeling of how brave you were at that young age that, probably helped in this healing. One of the things that you talked about is you said that you kind of got back to a normal life. And before this incident, when you watch this ESPN show, it shows the normal life. I mean, your dad was the coach of your teams and, he wanted you to be active. And so a lot of times that through this tragedy, you have that breakdown of the family and people start pointing fingers. One of the things that kind of made me smile during the ESPN episode was your mom, that when this happened, she said to your dad, "Well, why didn't you tell me? I would have drove you there." So she had those same feelings of wanting to get that revenge for you. I'm sure that you had those discussions as a family as well.
Yeah, whenever I speak and I show that E60, I think the crowd's favorite moment is when my mother's like, at least you could have done was let me drive you. Yeah, I mean, it was a tragic for everybody in the family, and a lot of times people forget. Like, everyone was so concerned about me when they really should have been worried about Daddy. I worked for 7 years at a place called Victim Services Center of Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. And one of the things that I was kind of most proud of that organization did, which they did way before I got there, but I was like, you know what? They offered counseling not just to the victim, but to the significant others. So if the mother or the father of a abused child or rape victim wanted counseling, which they need too, they offered it for them for free. So I think a lot of times people forget about the parents and just focus on the child in a sexual abuse case. But, and the showed in my dad's case, they needed counseling too.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And so let's go ahead and bring you to the present day now, Jody. I mean, so I really want to focus on who you've become, because now you've spent your life really, and you've picked up this charge. I mean, you do counseling, you do some great public speaking, you've got some great presentations that you talk about with the people who engage with you to come and speak to their groups. How did you pick this up as was this just kind of normal to say, you know what, there are other people out there that are like me, and I want to go ahead and share my experiences so they can kind of grow from this and understand that life can be normal? I mean, so what was the catalyst now for you to pick this up as your life's work?
It started as I wanted a free trip to New York City. I'd never been to New York City, and we got a call from I'd never been to New York City. I was 18 years old, almost 19 years old,
Right.
and we got a call from a producer from the Geraldo Rivera talk show
Right.
that wanted me and my dad to come on a show and talk about the case. And they had another situation where I think the guy's son was murdered, and then the dad went out and took revenge on the murderer. And so he was going to be sentenced. So Geraldo wanted us to come up, and he wanted us to share our story, hopefully to help this guy get a lighter sentence than a heavier sentence, because my dad wasn't a threat to society. My dad hadn't gotten in any trouble. And so he wanted to use us as an example, plus probably showed a video to help get, the ratings up. And so we go on a show, and I'll never forget, I thought kind of funny. So everyone was always supportive to my father. No one ever came to my dad and said, you should have done it. So we get to New York City, right? And we're there, and the first question from the audience is a guy asked my dad, how do you trust yourself to go into a public building and start firing away? And that's the first time anyone ever asked, in my experience, something negative about what my dad did. And I looked at Daddy, and Daddy looked at the guy, and he goes, when I looked down the barrel of that gun, I knew exactly who I was hitting. And Daddy staring at this guy. Well, all of a sudden, they go to commercial break. I look over, Daddy's still staring at him. I said, Daddy, stop it. Leave that man alone. He's just asking you a question. So after that show aired, it aired on the 4th of June, 1991. It airs. A couple weeks after the show airs, I get a call from the sheriff's major who investigated or helped locate me. He's the one in the video that yells, why, Gary, why? I get a call from him, and he said, Jody, look, I wanted to call you. This is going to be in the paper, and it's going to be on the news, and I wanted to be the first one to let you know that we just arrested this pastor at a church, and he was molesting these two boys, and one of the boys came forward after seeing you on the Geraldo show. And that's the moment when I was like, wow,
right,
I can make a difference.
Right.
And I just found out back in August, I think it was August, I went to the library and I looked it up. I found out that he pled guilty and was convicted. The pastor. I never knew what happened. I knew he was arrested, but I just found out last year that he actually was convicted and pled guilty.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I mean, that must have given you a lot of, I don't want to say satisfaction, but a lot of good feeling to say that you now had the opportunity to influence somebody else to say, this is wrong and I need to come forward.
What it basically signaled to me is that I can make a difference. I can do something, by speaking out, by raising awareness, I can make a difference to other people, and not just in my community, nationwide. And I also received a letter from a woman in Savannah, Georgia, who wrote it out, and she was just like, I understand everything that you went through. I went through something similar. And so to get, someone locally to stop them from being sexually abused, and have another woman write to me saying that, I cried watching you on Geraldo, it really inspired me to say, you know what? And that's when I kind of went on the path of like, you know what, I want to do, I want to keep raising awareness. I did a lot of talk shows when I was younger, back in college. And it was simply because, and I had family members like, why don't you just leave it alone? Why don't you just let sleeping dogs lie? I'm like, I have an opportunity to make a difference, to help other people, to show other people that this doesn't have to destroy your life. I was like, sorry, I have to do this.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things that we wanted to have you come here is because, and I think as we're getting up there in time, we want to think about how we want to, get to a closing. And certainly I want you to plug how people can reach out to you and how you could speak at their events and kind of help them in these situations if available. But I guess first, the question I want to ask you to kind of sum all this up is we hang on to those things that happen to us like badges of honor. I mean, whether it's a failure, whether it's a tragedy, whether it's a horror that happens in our life. So as we think about going forward and as we think about growing from those events, if you could give advice to the people who are out there to kind of give them some encouragement and inspiration, what kind of words do you give them?
I tell people with the proper support, you can overcome. One of the things that a lot of times that I've experienced with victims of this is they often don't get the proper support or know how to get the proper support. It could be your friends. For me, it was my mother. It could be through professional therapy. It could be through your local rape crisis center if they offer, counseling, like Victim Services offers free counseling. So there are many, many ways to get that support, but you have to be able, it's a process. You have to be able to work through it. But realize, you know what? It's not your fault. You're not forever damaged or scarred for life. When I hear that term, it just drives me nuts. I had a woman one time wrote a letter after we had done a presentation at an elementary school in Pennsylvania. And she said, I told my daughter that if anyone touches you, that it doesn't kill you like murder, but it kills your soul. I was like, oh dear God. Like, this girl will never disclose any sexual abuse if it happens to her, because she's not going to want her mother to know that her soul has been murdered. You know what I'm saying? So when you're using these words, trying to encourage kids to tell, like people go, well, why didn't you tell? I said, well, I knew my dad would kill him. When you're trying to help, a lot of times you're doing bad. So don't ever tell a kid if someone secret touches you or touches you inappropriately that it's going to murder your soul. Oh, that's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's great advice. And I got to tell you, Jody, I mean, you sharing this story, it's an honor for you to be here, and I got to tell you, it gives me inspiration and it gives me motivation to say, we just got to go on, and we just got to be able to, we're not historians, and we've got to maybe not forget the past, but we have to be able to understand the past and kind of bring it into our future. But I want to give you the opportunity. So if people are out there and they want to learn more about, your situation, if they want you to come and speak to their group, what's the best way that they can reach you?
The best way to reach me is to go to my website, jodyplauche.net. That's JODYPLAUCHE.net. I think there's a Twitter handle on there and an email account, and you could probably Google my name, my phone number will come up. I'm not, I'm not hiding. I'm pretty easy to get in contact with. So just Google it, and if you want to know, or if you want to see the E60, you can go to YouTube. It's on YouTube. Type in my name, type in ESPN E60. They did a great job, and it was funny how that piece came about. I was following Rick Riley on Twitter because he was posting updates and information about the Jerry Sandusky case. Well, he made a post one day, and I was driving down the road, and he made a post one day, and it said, if I get to 100,000 followers, I'll write an article on one of my followers. So I was like, And he goes, what's your story? So I was like, okay. So in 140 characters. I wasn't driving at this time. I pulled over, and I typed in, I was sexually abused, I was kidnapped, my father shot the kidnapper, and I tweeted it at him. Well, some of the people were going, where is this article going to appear? And Rick Riley was like, it's going to appear on my website or on my blog, or, I'll post it somewhere. Well, I get an email about a month later, hey, Rick has chosen you, tell us more. So I filled in the blanks, and that's how I ended up, just by a simple tweet, how I ended up on the front page of ESPN.com the day after Jerry Sandusky was sentenced. And one of the producers at E60 read the article, and he was like, wow, after I read the article, he goes, I had more questions I wanted answered than before I started with the article. And so he contacted me, and he was like, look, we want to do this. And it was great. He came down, and we filmed. You see, I think it's like 14 and a half minutes, but we must have filmed, 9 days worth. I cooked crawfish, and they came out there, and they filmed that. And they had me fishing out at False River. But they didn't use any of that for the footage, but it was cool because Tom Rinaldi came down. He came down, and he came to my brother's house, and my brother lives right across the street from where I live. And he gets out the car, and the first question he asked me, he goes, how come LSU fans don't like Les Miles? That was the first question he wanted to know. And you know what my answer was? I said the same reason boxing fans didn't like Larry Holmes.
That is funny.
Not Muhammad Ali.
So Jody, you've taken another step now, and you're really kind of writing a memoir of this experience. And, so we're really excited for that. And when that comes out, maybe you'll come back so we can discuss that again.
Oh, I would love to come back anytime you need me.
Awesome, and I look forward to that. And Jody, again, a lot of respect for you for coming on the show, for talking about this. And hopefully the people who listen to the podcast will understand that, tragedy happens, adversity happens, and we really just have to kind of pick ourselves back up and just move through our life. And my friend, I got to tell you, you are an inspiration, and I appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you.
And for everybody out there, I mean, this was kind of different from what we usually do when it comes to leadership topics, but I want you to really kind of understand that, things happen in our lives, and, we can very easily, take that bad path in response to that. But we've got to be able to persevere. We've got to be able to pick ourselves up. We've got to be able to move ourselves forward, and we've got to be able to have that successful life. I want to thank Jody Plauche for coming on and sharing his story. And for everybody out there, I'm Chris Cebollero, and I'll chat with everyone again real soon.
Thank you for joining us. The Ultimate Leadership Podcast is a production of chriscebollero.com. You can interact with us by email at ultimateleadership16@gmail.com. All rights reserved.